Helena's hand trembled, hovering over the scattered banknotes on the mahogany dresser. $25,000 in cold, hard cash, carelessly strewn about as if it were yesterday's newspaper. The fluorescent lights of the opulent apartment gleamed harshly on the greenbacks, accentuating their allure. She scanned the room, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that seemed to echo in the otherwise silent, sterile space. She was alone, utterly, completely alone. Or at least that's what she desperately hoped. On the other side of a meticulously crafted false wall, concealed behind an antique, full-length mirror, Ricardo observed her with predatory intensity. His usually cold, steel-gray eyes were now narrowed, fixed on the woman in the unremarkable, faded blue cleaning uniform who had just stepped hesitantly into the master bedroom. It was a scene he knew intimately, a perverse play he had witnessed countless times before with other unsuspecting employees. The script was always the same: greedy, grasping hands reaching for the forbidden fruit, pockets being surreptitiously filled, elaborate lies being carefully constructed, excuses being rehearsed in their minds. Everyone, he'd convinced himself, had a price. Always. Helena took a shaky breath, trying to quell the whirlwind of conflicting emotions churning within her. With trembling fingers, she retrieved her battered smartphone from the depths of her worn pocket. Ricardo leaned forward imperceptibly, a bitter, knowing smile twisting his lips. Ah yes, here it was. The moment of truth. The predictable downfall. Another nail in the coffin of his cynical theory about the inherent corruptibility of human nature. Another programmed disappointment. He could almost hear the internal monologue playing out in her head. The rationalizations, the justifications, the desperate pleas for forgiveness that were sure to come. She would concoct some elaborate story, claim she needed the money for an emergency, and then grovel and beg for his understanding when inevitably confronted. But then, Helena did something entirely unexpected. Something that threw a wrench into his carefully crafted narrative. Instead of reaching for the money, she raised her phone and, with a decisive click, snapped a picture of the incriminating scene. Ricardo's brow furrowed in confusion. What in God's name was she doing? He watched intently as the woman typed furiously on her phone, her fingers dancing across the screen with surprising agility. He couldn't quite decipher the message, but he could clearly see the worried, almost desperate, expression etched on her face. It wasn't the calculating, avaricious expression of someone plotting a theft. It was something else entirely, something genuine. Helena tucked the phone back into her pocket and, without so much as touching a single bill, quietly turned and left the room. Ricardo froze, stunned, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. It simply didn't make sense. She had been presented with the perfect opportunity. She was alone, or so she thought. There were no witnesses, no possibility of detection, no repercussions. Why hadn't she taken the money? He emerged from his concealed observation post and walked slowly towards the dresser, his gaze locked on the untouched stack of bills. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Ricardo felt something stir within him, something unfamiliar and unsettling. It wasn't the familiar sting of anger or the hollow satisfaction of being proven right. It was shame, a deep, uncomfortable, gnawing shame that he didn't quite know how to process or even acknowledge. Helena was a woman of 38 years, carrying the crushing weight of the world squarely on her narrow shoulders. She rose before the crack of dawn, at 4 a.m, every single day, and endured 2 grueling bus rides to reach the affluent neighborhood where she eked out a meager living. Her 2 precious children, Julio, 9, and Camila, a vibrant 6-year-old, were left in the care of her aging grandmother while she scrubbed toilets and dusted furniture in the homes of the obscenely wealthy. People who rarely acknowledged her existence. People who left paltry tips, smaller than the cost of a decent cup of coffee, just to salve their consciences and feel momentarily magnanimous. This was only her 3rd day working at Ricardo's meticulously maintained apartment. The employment agency had warned her that he was demanding, that several other employees hadn't lasted even a week under his exacting gaze. Helena desperately needed this job. The rent was overdue, threatening to leave her and her children homeless. Julio's cracked and outdated glasses were desperately in need of replacement. And Camila was scheduled to begin extensive and expensive dental treatment to correct a painful malocclusion. Every penny counted. Every day of work was a victory, a small battle won against the relentless tide of poverty. When she had first laid eyes on that careless display of cash on the dresser, her heart had leaped into her throat. It was more money than she earned in an entire 6 months of backbreaking labor. It could solve all her immediate problems at once. It could provide her children with a modicum of security, a chance at a better life. But then, she had thought of Julio and Camila. She thought about the kind of example she wanted to set for them, the values she wanted to instill. She thought about the strong, principled woman her own mother had raised her to be. And she knew, with unwavering certainty, that she simply couldn't take that money, no matter how dire her circumstances. Ricardo spent the remainder of the day silently observing Helena as she went about her work. She cleaned every corner with meticulous care, treated his expensive and impersonal belongings with a surprising degree of respect, and even hummed softly under her breath as she carefully arranged the books on the living room shelf. There was a quiet dignity in her bearing that he couldn't ignore, a quiet strength that both disturbed and fascinated him in equal measure. When she finally finished her work and quietly left the apartment, Ricardo picked up his phone, his mind racing. He had a crucial decision to make. He could continue his cruel, manipulative game, leave more money scattered about, and attempt to break the spirit and integrity of this remarkable woman. Or, he could do something radically different, something he hadn't done in a long, long time. He could admit that he was wrong. He stared at the untouched bills on the dresser, and a dawning realization washed over him. The real test wasn't for Helena. It never had been. It was for him. And for the first time in his life, Ricardo wasn't at all sure he would pass. Video interruption. The next morning, Ricardo awoke with an unfamiliar weight on his chest that he couldn't quite explain. He had slept fitfully, his dreams haunted by Helena's tired face, by the image of her trembling hands hovering over the money, and by the impossible choice she had made. He rose from bed and walked to the panoramic window of his penthouse apartment, watching the city slowly awaken below. A million souls hurrying to work, living their lives, fighting their own private battles. When had he stopped seeing people as individuals and started viewing them as mere data points, as nothing more than predictable variables in his twisted social experiment? The answer came to him with brutal clarity. It was 12 years ago, when his company went bankrupt in a spectacular and humiliating fashion. When his business partner, the man he had considered a brother, absconded with all the investors' money, leaving him to shoulder the blame. When his fiancée, who had sworn eternal devotion, abandoned him the moment the bank accounts ran dry. Ricardo had painstakingly rebuilt his empire from the ashes of that devastating betrayal. He had amassed a fortune once again, surpassing even his previous wealth. But something essential inside him had died in that process. Trust, faith in humanity, the ability to believe in genuine goodness and altruism. Since then, he had made it his personal mission to test everyone who worked for him. He would deliberately leave money lying around, jewelry in plain sight, valuable objects in obvious places, all in an effort to expose the inherent dishonesty he believed lurked within every human heart. And, to his bitter satisfaction, almost everyone, without exception, had eventually succumbed to temptation and taken something. The housekeeper who had worked for him faithfully for 2 years had pilfered a vintage gold watch. The seemingly trustworthy driver had siphoned $500 from the petty cash safe. The secretary, who had frequently wept about her dire financial straits, had embezzled company funds with breathtaking audacity. Ricardo had meticulously documented everything. He kept the hidden camera recordings and financial records as bitter trophies, grim reminders of his confirmed theory about the inherent depravity of mankind. Helena arrived promptly at 7 in the morning. Ricardo watched her enter the apartment, noticing her worn shoes, her patched-up handbag, and the profound tiredness etched around her eyes, a weariness she desperately tried to conceal with a polite, almost apologetic smile. He had delved into her background the night before, driven by a need to understand her. Single mother, 2 children, minimum wage, living in a dilapidated apartment in a low-income neighborhood. She had every conceivable reason in the world to take that money, but she hadn't. That both irritated and intrigued him in equal measure. It threatened to unravel his carefully constructed convictions. It forced him to question everything he had built as unassailable truth over the past 12 years. Ricardo didn't like being questioned, especially by his own nagging thoughts. He decided to raise the stakes of his twisted game. He nonchalantly left $3,000 in crisp bills on the coffee table in the living room, in plain sight. Then he scattered another $2,000 in the guest bathroom, carelessly tossed next to the cleaning supplies. If Helena was indeed as cunning and opportunistic as he suspected, she was simply biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Everyone, he firmly believed, waited for the right moment. While she meticulously cleaned the kitchen, Ricardo sat in the living room with his laptop, feigning work, but actually watching her every move through the subtle reflection on the darkened screen. Helena found the money on the table. She stopped abruptly, her breath catching in her throat. She glanced around cautiously, as if expecting to be observed, and then did precisely what she had done the day before. She raised her phone, snapped a quick photograph, and resumed her cleaning, without so much as a second glance at the tempting pile of cash. Ricardo clenched his fists in frustration. This was not normal behavior. No one was that honest. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she was planning something bigger, something more elaborate. Maybe she was intentionally gaining his trust in preparation for a future, more lucrative scam. Yes, that had to be it. People weren't inherently good. He had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. During her lunch break, Helena ate her simple, pre-packed meal in the small, utilitarian service area. Rice, beans, and a small piece of chicken, a meager offering against the gnawing pangs of hunger. Ricardo walked by, ostensibly to grab a glass of water, but in truth he wanted to observe her more closely. He wanted to find a flaw, a chink in the armor of honesty she wore so convincingly. Helena was on the phone with someone. Her voice was low and hushed, but he managed to catch tantalizing fragments of the conversation. It was with her daughter, Camila. The little girl was complaining about wanting a new toy, a sparkly pony that all her friends at school seemed to possess. Helena took a deep, steadying breath before responding, and Ricardo saw a faint sheen of tears shimmering in her eyes. "My love, Mommy can't buy it for you right now. But you know what we can do? We can draw that pony together when I get home. It'll be even more special because it'll be just ours. Made with love. Okay?" The child on the other end of the line replied, her voice laced with disappointment, but ultimately accepting. Helena hung up the phone and quickly wiped away her tears, as if ashamed of her momentary vulnerability. Then, she looked up at the ceiling and whispered something that Ricardo couldn't fully understand, but it sounded like a prayer. A heartfelt plea for strength, for patience, for unwavering hope. At that precise moment, something shifted irrevocably inside Ricardo. It wasn't a dramatic, earth-shattering event. It wasn't like in the movies. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible, cracking sound, like a bone slowly settling back into place after years of being broken and misaligned. He finally understood that Helena wasn't the one being tested. She never had been. He was the test. His own lost humanity was being tested, and he was failing miserably. Ricardo retreated back to his office and closed the door, shutting out the world. For the first time in 12 long years, he wept. Ricardo spent the next 3 days observing Helena in a completely different light. He was no longer searching for flaws, for signs of deceit. He was now trying to understand who this remarkable woman truly was, the woman who had so effortlessly defied everything he believed about humanity. And the more he observed her, the more profoundly ashamed he became of his own actions. Helena always arrived 15 minutes early for work. She cleaned every corner of the apartment as if it were her own home, treating even the most mundane tasks with care and attention. She watered the plants diligently, arranged the books in order of size with meticulous precision, and left polite, handwritten notes whenever something needed special attention or repair. She treated that cold, impersonal apartment with more genuine affection than he ever had. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Ricardo feigned departure for a meeting, but instead remained hidden in his office. He wanted to observe Helena's behavior when she was absolutely certain she was alone, without any possibility of being watched. Would she be different? Would she finally let her guard down and reveal her true self? Helena put on some music on her phone while she cleaned. It was a soft, uplifting gospel tune that echoed through the otherwise silent apartment. She hummed along quietly, her voice slightly out of tune, but filled with genuine feeling. Between one song and another, Ricardo could faintly hear her talking to herself, or perhaps praying. She thanked God for having work, for having her health, and for her children being well. She asked for strength to keep going, wisdom to raise her kids, and patience to face the seemingly insurmountable hardships that life had thrown her way. There was nothing manufactured or fake about it. No carefully constructed mask, just a tired but resilient woman trying to find the inner strength to keep fighting. Ricardo started making discreet phone calls. First, he called the employment agency, requesting Helena's complete work history. He discovered that she had impeccable references from every place she had ever worked. One of her former employers stated unequivocally that Helena was the most honest and trustworthy person she had ever met, and that she had once returned a diamond earring she had found lodged under the couch, even though no one would ever have known if she had simply kept it. Then, he hired a private investigator, not to spy on her with malicious intent, but to understand her life, her circumstances, her struggles. He wanted to know her real needs, her deepest dreams, and the challenges she faced on a daily basis. The investigator's report arrived 2 days later, and Ricardo read every word with growing attentiveness. Helena had lost her husband 5 years earlier in a tragic work-related accident. Since then, she had been single-handedly raising her 2 children. She worked at 3 different houses 6 days a week, just to make ends meet. Her aging mother, who helped care for the children, suffered from diabetes and required expensive medication. Julio, her bright and academically gifted son, wore badly damaged glasses, held together with tape, that were woefully inadequate for his needs. Camila, her vibrant and precocious daughter, had serious dental problems that required urgent and costly treatment. The family lived in a tiny, dilapidated apartment that leaked profusely whenever it rained. Helena woke up religiously at 4 in the morning and didn't arrive home until 9 at night. On Sundays, her only day off, she spent her time washing clothes, cooking meals for the entire week, and trying to spend quality time with her children. There were no luxuries, no breaks, just a relentless cycle of survival and unconditional love. Ricardo closed the report and stared blankly into space for a long, silent moment. That woman had every imaginable reason in the world to take the money he had carelessly left lying around. She could have dramatically changed her and her children's lives in an instant, but instead, she had resolutely chosen dignity over despair, integrity over convenience. She had chosen to be true to herself, even when no one was watching. He picked up the phone and started making other calls. Calls that he knew he would never be able to reveal. He spoke with his lawyer, his accountant, and with individuals who possessed the power to make things happen discreetly and efficiently. Ricardo was planning something, but this time it wasn't a cruel and manipulative test. It was reparation, an attempt to fix not only what he had done to Helena, but also what he had allowed himself to become over the years. On Friday, when Helena arrived for work, she found a sealed envelope prominently displayed on the living room table. Inside was a typewritten letter. It wasn't signed, but the words were carefully chosen and deeply impactful. The letter stated that her services were exceptional, and that from that day forward, she would be offered a permanent, full-time contract, a fair and competitive salary, formal employment status, and all the standard benefits. It also stipulated that a comprehensive health insurance plan would be provided for her and her family, covering all their medical needs. Helena read the letter 3 times, her hands visibly trembling. Then, she sank to her knees right there in the middle of the impeccably clean living room and wept. She cried with profound relief, with overwhelming gratitude, and with the accumulated exhaustion of years of relentless struggle. She cried because finally, after so long fighting alone, someone had finally seen her worth, had acknowledged her inherent dignity, and had offered her a lifeline. From the concealed vantage point of his office, Ricardo watched everything through the subtle reflection of the darkened glass. And for the second time in as many weeks he cried, too. But this time his tears weren't born of shame or regret. They were born of something he thought he had lost forever. They were born of hope. Hope that perhaps there was still time for him to reclaim his lost humanity. 3 weeks after signing the official contract, Ricardo finally mustered the courage to do what he knew he had to do. He could no longer hide behind anonymous gestures. He couldn't continue to be the unseen benefactor who had changed Helena's life without having the basic decency to look her directly in the eyes and ask for her forgiveness. It was a Monday morning when he resolved to reveal himself. Helena was diligently cleaning the living room shelf when Ricardo walked into the room and asked her to sit down. His expression was unusually serious, almost somber. Helena felt her heart begin to race with apprehension. Was she being fired? Had she inadvertently done something wrong? Fear gripped her instantly. Ricardo took a deep, fortifying breath before he began to speak. He told her everything about the money he had scattered around the apartment, about the hidden observation points from which he had watched her, like a predator stalking its prey, about the cruel and demeaning test he had subjected all his employees to over the years, about how every single person before her had ultimately failed, succumbing to the temptation of greed, about his deeply ingrained, cynical belief that every person, no matter how virtuous they appeared, ultimately had a price. Helena visibly paled. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. She stared at Ricardo with a complex mix of shock, profound disappointment, and something that felt agonizingly like betrayal. He continued talking, his voice becoming increasingly choked with emotion. He told her about his former fiancée, about his deceitful business partner who had stolen everything, about how he had lost all faith in the inherent goodness of humanity. He explained that he had never truly imagined that anyone would actually pass his twisted test, and that she had single-handedly shattered all his deeply held certainties. Then came the hardest part. Ricardo looked directly into Helena's tear-filled eyes and uttered the words he hadn't spoken in over a decade. "Forgive me. I was completely and utterly wrong. You didn't deserve to be subjected to that cruel test. No one does. I allowed myself to become something truly terrible, and I only realized it when I saw who you truly are." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Helena slowly rose from the chair, tears streaming freely down her face. Ricardo braced himself for an outburst of righteous anger, for a torrent of recriminations, and for the inevitable dismissal that would likely mean he would never see her again. He knew that he deserved all of that and more, but Helena did something completely unexpected. She looked at him with a deep, almost unbearable sadness and said, "You have no idea how many times I thought about taking that money, how many sleepless nights I spent agonizing over how much easier it would make my life. My daughter desperately needs to see a dentist. My son's glasses are broken and inadequate. My mother needs her medication. The rent is overdue, and we're facing eviction." Ricardo felt each word hit him like a physical blow to the stomach, each one a stinging reminder of his callous indifference. Helena continued, her voice trembling but surprisingly firm. "But if I had taken that money, how could I ever look my children in the eyes again? How could I possibly teach them to be good and honest people if I myself wasn't? My husband died working honestly, earning a meager but decent living. He taught me that dignity is not negotiable, no matter the price." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "And you turned my integrity into a twisted test, into a perverse game." She grabbed her worn handbag and started walking purposefully towards the door. Ricardo felt a surge of panic rise within him. He couldn't let her leave like this, not after everything that had transpired. He stood up quickly and pleaded, "Wait, please don't go." Helena stopped, but she didn't turn around. Ricardo made the most important decision of his life at that precise moment. He grabbed his checkbook from the nearby desk and scribbled down a generous amount. Then he tore the check into shreds. He wrote another check for an even larger sum and tore that one up as well. Then he finally realized that it wasn't about the money. It never had been. "I can't undo what I've done," he said, his voice breaking with raw emotion. "But I can dedicate the rest of my life to trying to be half the person you are. I don't want you to work for me anymore as an employee. I want you to teach me how to be human again. Please, give me that chance. Let me try to fix the broken man I've become." Helena finally turned around to face him. Her eyes were still brimming with tears, but there was something different in them now. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, at least. It was something far more precious and fragile. It was possibility. She took a deep breath and said, "You betrayed my trust, Ricardo. It's going to take a long time to rebuild that, and I don't know if it's even possible. But I believe in second chances because I've needed plenty myself throughout my life. If you truly want to change, I'm willing to stay, but not as your employee. I'll stay as someone who's going to hold you accountable for that change, every single day." Ricardo nodded slowly, tears now flowing uncontrollably down his face. For the first time in 12 long years, he wasn't trying to hide his humanity. He was exposing every wound, every scar, every broken piece of who he was. And Helena, with her quiet strength, unwavering faith, and impossible grace, decided to stay and help him gather those pieces, one by one. The months that followed were a period of true and profound transformation for Ricardo. He didn't change overnight because real change never happens that way. But he changed step by step, choice by choice, day by day. Helena never went back to cleaning the apartment. Instead, Ricardo hired her as a personal consultant, someone who would help him reconnect with the real world he had abandoned so long ago, to help him rediscover his lost humanity. The salary was fair, even generous. But Helena insisted on working hard for every single penny. She didn't want charity. She wanted dignity. The first thing Ricardo did was dismantle every single hidden observation point in the apartment, every false mirror, every hidden camera, every carefully constructed trap he had built over the years. Helena watched him systematically destroy them all, and only when the last piece of surveillance equipment was removed did she finally offer him a genuine, heartfelt smile for the first time since that fateful first encounter. Then came the bigger, more challenging changes. Ricardo began attending the small, unassuming church that Helena frequented on Sundays. At first, he felt completely out of place, uncomfortable with the simplicity and genuine faith of the people he encountered there. But over time, those ordinary people taught him lessons that no business school or self-help book ever could. They taught him about the power of community, about the importance of serving others, and about finding true wealth in places that had nothing to do with money. He met Julio and Camila at a casual dinner that Helena organized at her modest apartment. The children were understandably shy and reserved at first, but Ricardo made a genuine effort to connect with them, not with expensive gifts or empty promises, but with genuine presence and sincere interest. He listened intently as Julio talked passionately about his dream of becoming an engineer. He patiently listened to Camila's elaborate, made-up stories about princesses who rescued dragons instead of the other way around. Ricardo quietly set up a substantial education fund for both of them, not as a grand, ostentatious gesture, but as a genuine investment in futures he genuinely wanted to see flourish. He paid for Camila's extensive dental treatment and bought Julio a new pair of prescription glasses that allowed him to see the world with newfound clarity. He arranged for the family to move to a safer, more spacious apartment in a better neighborhood, near good schools. But the most significant transformation happened deep within him. Ricardo began to truly see people again. He stopped relentlessly testing the humanity of others and started challenging his own ingrained cynicism. He paid fair and living wages to every single person who worked for him, regardless of their position. He greeted the building's doorman by name and took a genuine interest in his life. He engaged the barista at his local coffee shop in meaningful conversations about her dreams and aspirations. He donated generously to causes that truly helped people in need. Helena cautiously observed these dramatic transformations at first, then with growing hope and encouragement. She didn't allow him to forget who he had been. Whenever Ricardo slipped back into his old, cynical habits, she was always there to gently remind him of the better path he had chosen. But she also celebrated every small victory, every moment when he consciously chose to be a better man. 2 years after that fateful Monday morning, Ricardo summoned the courage to ask Helena to marry him. His proposal wasn't extravagant or ostentatious. It occurred on a quiet Sunday afternoon after church, with Julio and Camila beaming with excitement and Helena's mother smiling through happy tears. He knelt down on one knee and uttered simple but heartfelt words. "You saved me when I didn't even know I needed saving. You taught me that the greatest treasure isn't in what we have, but in who we are. Will you spend the rest of your life reminding me of that?" Helena said yes without hesitation, not because he was wealthy, but because she had witnessed the remarkable man he had become. She had borne witness to his incredible journey from cynicism to faith, from mistrust to love, from isolation to family. The wedding was a simple but joyous affair, filled with people who truly mattered to them. There was no ostentation, only genuine love and happiness. Julio proudly served as the page boy, looking dapper in his brand new suit. Camila, radiant with joy, was the flower girl, smiling brightly with her newly straightened and healthy teeth. The church was overflowing with people whose lives Ricardo and Helena had touched in meaningful ways over the previous 2 years. At the reception, Ricardo gave a heartfelt toast. He spoke candidly about how he had spent years believing that everyone had a price, when in truth the one who had no price was himself. He had essentially sold his own humanity for wealth and bitterness. He spoke eloquently about Helena, about how she had taught him that integrity is not negotiable, that dignity cannot be bought, and that true love cannot be tested or measured. Today, Ricardo runs a thriving foundation that is dedicated to helping single mothers find dignified employment and meaningful opportunities to improve their lives. Helena works alongside him, ensuring that every person they assist is treated with the same respect and compassion that she herself had never given up on. Their remarkable story serves as a powerful reminder that the greatest riches aren't kept locked away in vaults, but are found within the human heart. That a single act of integrity can change not just one life, but countless others. And that it's never truly too late to choose to be human again.